Greetings and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I'm your host, Scott, and of course, with me, as always, is my excellent co host, Caleb. Caleb, what's going on tonight?
Not much. It's still warm here. Aren't we supposed to be in fall? What's going on? What the crap?
Don't jinx it, man. Just enjoy it.
I don't enjoy it. I want it to be cold.
Yeah, you're miserly that way.
Yes.
We'll say we're back again to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that has shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of someone who grew up during that era. So, Caleb, this is a fun one. Who is our guest today?
Yeah, it's funny that I'm introducing this guest because
Mm-hmm.
he's actually a family member of yours. So
Mm-hmm.
this is DJ, who was he is your cousin. He was your cousin, and he is your cousin. Both are true.
Yes, yes. As far as I know, he's still my cousin,
Yeah.
even after talking with him. Yes, so we interview my cousin DJ, who is a year younger than me. Did not go to our church, but still very, very heavily involved in youth group in the 90s. Probably more so than any other family member I had, to be quite honest with you. And you also have a connection with him, which we found out way later, which was pretty funny because he saw you from far at like the soccer field or something like that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Our girl, my oldest, and his oldest, both play on the same homeschool soccer team. Now they're on different teams. His girl plays on the varsity team, and mine is on the junior varsity team. And then his youngest actually has interacted with my oldest quite a bit. They've actually connected a bit. And so even though she's not on the team, she's been at some practices. And so yeah, it was kind of I think it was actually me who I was sitting at practice, and I was like, because I think I texted you. No, I was at a scrimmage. We were doing just a
Yeah.
family scrimmage. So there's a whole bunch
Yeah.
of families there. I was playing goalie and being horrible, and because I can't run because my stupid feet. And so I like texted you. I was like, hey, does DJ homeschool his kids? Or I was
Yeah.
like, does your cousin homeschool your kids? And you're like, does DJ? He's like, yeah. Does he homeschool his kids? And you were like, yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, I think he might be at the soccer thing I'm at. And I went up
Yeah.
and said, are you Scott's cousin? And then he recognized me. At the time, I had really long hair and a pretty big beard, so I think I'm a little harder to recognize. But he was like, "Oh my gosh!" And then we talked, and we've talked at a bunch of the events. We don't see each other a ton. Again, just, the girls are on different teams, and I have a really hard time making it because they play at 3:30, and I am in work still.
Right.
So, but yeah, we've seen him around. So
Yeah, you creeped on him a little bit and approached him looking like a creeper. Fortunately, DJ's a good enough dude to be like, "Oh yeah, I know who this guy is." So
yeah, and we're in Minneapolis too. So good thing you just think I was some homeless guy and shoot me down.
that's right.
Because I
That's
know he's
right.
always packing.
Oh, yeah, you'll find that out in this episode. Um,
Such a
don't
weird
ruin
comment.
anything,
It's,
Caleb.
it's
Don't
not
give it
true at
all away.
all.
We just end
Oh
up
man.
talking about our gun collections. No, it's no. What I really appreciate about talking to DJ is, to be honest, like cousins, we were great friends growing up. We just don't see each other a lot, and
Hmm.
it was reconnecting in multiple ways. He's always been slow to speak, but also very, very wisely spoken, and that comes through very well in his answers.
Yeah.
And he gets as excited as we do about some of these experiences, and then can thoroughly talk about why things have kind of changed over time for better or worse. And it was a lot of fun connecting with him on all those levels. I will say that the traditional question we end with, what's the craziest youth group story you have, was answered very, very clearly in the middle of this interview. So we do not
Yeah.
end with that question. So you'll find that out. You'll find that one out soon enough.
Yeah. I think what was really interesting about hearing about his youth group experience specifically, there's other things interesting hearing about his transition through adult life and stuff like that. But this is, we've talked about the idea of branching out outside of Five Oaks. That eventually, that's just, if this podcast continues, that's where it probably goes, because there's a finite amount of people who went to Five Oaks who we're still can get in contact with, who would want to talk. Not everybody wants
Right.
to go into all these things. So we've talked about this idea that we're going to start expanding out. And what was pretty interesting about this is that kind of some of the zaniness and some of the intensity and the extreme 90s youth group tropes come through. And it just is another really interesting example of, although a totally different church, there's these similarities and these themes and these things that just come through. And you'll find it. There's other episodes. I think the other episode that I'm going to reference here is already out. I think, yes, it should be. We talked with Josh and Eric about Christian music, and those guys are from the Bible Belt, and their
Hmm.
experience was different. So there is even this cultural difference, but that Minnesota youth group experience where there was something about it just seems so similar, even though totally different church, and really churches that have zero connection, I would say, just none. And yet that
Yeah, not that we knew of. Like
yeah,
maybe the pastors were doing conferences together because they had to
yeah,
figure out one way or the other to be communicating for the internet. And so they probably had, meetings and conferences that they were attending, but it's almost like there was some spirit connecting them
yeah,
together.
yeah. So I thought that was really interesting, and it made me excited to do some of the branching out. Again, obviously, this has been super exciting for us to kind of connect with people from our youth group experience, and the theme of hearing those stories and that progression is still awesome to hear, and especially we have these personal connections. But it made me excited to that there are things to be learned from kind of people outside of Five Oaks as well, just because I think we're going to get this variety of experience. Some of these themes will come up. There's going to be some interesting takeaways from all of these conversations. So I was excited. We've done this a couple times with a couple people, but this one really shined through this idea of that last question, the zany question of what's the craziest thing, will not be wasted on people. If it may at times, but there's a lot of people it's not going to be wasted on when we get
Nope.
to ask that.
Nope, not at all. Well, so DJ, thank you very much for chatting with us. I have a feeling he will almost certainly be a guest on another topic moving forward. The reason I know that's because
We
we've already
already
recorded
recorded
it.
it. I like how you're trying to play sly about it. Like,
Actually, when
oh,
I
don't tell anyone.
shh, shh, quiet. Honestly, though, when I started thinking that, I'm like, I didn't remember that we'd already recorded that. But he's that, well spoken and thoughtful about his answers
Yeah.
that he'll be a great guest no matter what. So
Yeah.
DJ, thank you very much for spending time with us, and thank you very much to listening everyone to this episode, and we hope you enjoy.
I want to break in and quickly remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s may not be held by or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead we want to let people share how they feel. During our interviews and discussions, we may not represent every point of view on a given subject, and we understand that this may be frustrating at times, but it is the nature of a podcast discussion with a limited amount of time. We also know and want to acknowledge that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remember the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
DJ, how are you? It is great to see you, even though I do see you from time to time. It is really great to see you here tonight. How have you been?
I've been well. Nice to see you too. Scott,
Yes,
nice to see you, Caleb. Are
thank
we
you
gonna are
for
we gonna explain who I am? Or like
No,
why
they'll
we
figure
see
it
just
out.
jump right
They'll
in.
they'll
There's,
figure it out
yeah.
why we see each other from time to
from
time.
time to time. And it hasn't been 30 years since I've seen you, thank God.
Right, right.
No, for the listener out there, to be clear up front, this will help explain some of our stories and conversations. DJ is my cousin, and our moms are
Mhm.
sisters, and we're pretty close in age. We're both the oldest of three boys. So
Yeah,
DJ and I have always been,
significant.
yep, always been the, leaders of the pack, the type A's, the annoying older brothers. So we do that very, very well.
Yep, very good at that.
So obviously DJ and I have done a lot of life together. When I mentioned in previous episodes when I was living overseas, we'd come back and we'd stay at your house for like 2 months, like in your basement.
Yeah, in like a tiny rambler,
Yep.
and yeah, it was fun. It's fun
Hmm.
for us. I don't know, was it fun for you? I thought it was fun.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's great. it was great. But there are six boys,
Yeah,
under 12.
I think our parents were like, "This is nuts,"
Yeah,
but yeah,
yeah. This is after a while, they're like, I want to go back to Belgium,
right.
which nobody has ever said before. So,
That sounded cool to me.
so, well, yeah, DJ and I have somewhat similar stories. To be clear as well, DJ did not go to Five Oaks Youth Group, but he did go to a contemporary youth group in the Twin Cities Metro at the same time.
Hmm.
So we are curious how his experience is similar and different to ours. So, DJ, let's start from the beginning. Like when, how, why did you start attending Wooddale Youth Group?
Yeah, the other side of the Twin Cities.
Opposite, the
But
weird
yeah,
side.
sure.
Wait, we're not the weird side?
Nah,
That doesn't
no,
seem right.
No, I feel like for those not in the Twin Cities, like it all becomes the same out on the periphery. So,
that's true.
yeah, yeah. So, you know, it really ties back to my family, my parents. My parents started attending the church when they were newly married, I think shortly before I was born, early in their faith, got involved when it was a small church, and that church moved to actually its current location, and they've been at that church ever since. Still attend there. So that's where I
Mm,
grew up, going to, all the levels of youth involvement at church, Sunday school, and whatnot. So by the time I hit like youth group age, that I mean, I that was just my normal life. So my parents are to thank for raising me in that context, I suppose.
hmm
And the church that I grew up at had like a really epic, crazy youth group culture that well preceded me. So, I
Hmm.
mean, I always had that to kind of look forward to. Like, I knew what I was getting into by the time I hit
mm,
seventh grade. It was very well established. The 7, 8, 9 junior high was being run by like the youth pastor that was good family friends of ours and was just like a legend at the church. And so
hmm
that was the path that brought me into my youth group,
hmm So it was kind of well known and famous almost before you even got to the middle school.
at least within the church. Yeah.
Of course,
Probably not outside of the church, but
of
yeah,
course, of course.
totally. Like it was it was something to look forward to,
Hmm.
Hmm
kind of like to get into the antics. Which
hmm
if I'm honest, seventh grade me or like, preceding that sixth grade me was I wasn't excited about all the craziness because
Mm,
I was too shy for that. But at the same time,
sure,
the hype was real and
sure.
I kind of grew into that culture. Yeah.
Hmm.
There was a lot of hype around youth group. It was about getting everyone excited
Oh yeah.
to
Yeah.
spend all that time with them. I will
Yeah.
say, if I remember this correctly, is that Pastor Heather, is she still there
Well,
in a
so
different
yes,
capacity? It's a very
she
unique situation.
it is exceptionally unique because she's approaching probably like 30 years of
Unbelievable.
junior
Hmm.
high, youth ministry at a church. Yeah, totally unheard of. And I actually, so it was the pastor before. So there's these long histories of tenure at this church because the pastor that I had, who was our family friend, had done it for a long time, and
Hmm.
he ended up leaving the position just as I was finishing in that program, which was ninth grade. So like when at the end of my ninth grade year, I was headed into the senior high,
Hmm.
side of youth group, and that's when he and his family like they took another church position in California and moved or whatever. So the timing was kind of right. But that Heather, who you referenced, was kind of like the intern under Greg, like right out of college, I
Hmm.
think, was kind of like the heir apparent to, and has been doing it ever since, which is, yeah,
Crazy.
is real crazy. So yeah, I guess it speaks to a good program at that church. It's changed a lot
Hmm
in these decades, and under her leadership, I'm sure she's taken it in a lot of different directions, but yeah.
hmm Let's describe real quick also for listener just what was, and you and I can kind of share this, right? What was our Christian upbringing like? I think of
Yeah.
that, and I don't know if you think of our grandparents immediately, but I certainly do.
I totally did, and I wondered if like I assumed you would too, but I was like, yeah, that for us there is kind of a generation, our grandparents' generation of faith. Yeah, for like you mentioned, our it's our moms that are sisters, and so for that side of the family, that was totally meaningful. I know
Mhm.
the way that I'd say our grandparents kind of came into more of an evangelical faith, later in life
Yes.
as parents themselves and starting, when they were raising our parents and having, grown up in a, kind of a more mainline denomination. So I know that was meaningful and that was very meaningful for my mom. I referenced that too, that my parents then as young adults out of college, newly married, starting life and family around the same time. And I'm going to get all those details wrong and I'm going to like misremember the history of our family, but there was a
Yep.
similar kind of evangelical turn
Hmm.
that and then like I said, that was this one church for my parents and that's been just bedrock for them
Hmm.
over all these years. So then I accordingly like I grew up in a Christian home and like that's in the most kind of basic way that you could imagine.
Hmm.
All the features were there.
Pretty standard.
Yeah. Yeah. Not to be flippant, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it was just
Sure. Going to church every day. Youth group was a priority.
every day.
Helping every day. Sorry. Well, it wasn't that extreme.
Yeah.
Yikes.
No, but yes. Sunday morning was a priority and
Hmm.
Wednesdays were a priority.
Hmm.
And that started, before like your typical kind of teenage youth group years. There was other Wednesday night programming. I remember doing lots of that. So
Hmm.
that, and we may get into it more, but as I got older and as I was in my teenage years and getting into like high school, my involvement at youth group, it was like a second home for sure. Not only just the church itself, but then what like the relationships, like my friendships and their homes, like that community, much like you've described with your youth group experience and the people at Five Oaks, that was so familiar and so comfortable. And I mean, that's kind of some of the result of spending my whole life there up until that point.
Hmm. If youth group, 90s youth group did anything well, it was foster community.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I do think some of those churches understood that very early on. And as soon as you started getting families involved and invested in those kids, because I'm sure your home was open to
yep.
plenty of youth gatherings and that sort of thing.
Oh
So,
yeah.
and maybe my parents weren't going to to Five Oaks, but they certainly let us hang out at their house all
Right.
the
Yeah.
time. So it
Yeah.
was
They're
another
like these.
hub, right? You can jump
Yeah,
from hub to hub and still have a safe place to be yourself.
totally. Yes.
So before we move on, shout out Pops. You were the best. So
Yes.
if
Yep.
if either of our moms ever listen, which who
Yeah,
knows, but he was a great grandfather and left a legacy.
definitely did. Yep.
Why don't you, if you don't mind, kind of speak to that part that you just alluded to? Like, what was your involvement at church, at youth group, as you moved through high school within that community? Were you leading groups? Were you playing music? What were you doing?
All those things.
Hmm.
And as I kind of alluded to, I mean, most of my life, I was very introverted, shy, quiet. My relationships at church were few. Like I had in those early years in youth group, those seventh, eighth, kind of getting into ninth grade. I was very like participatory in going to all of the things, but I was not up on stage. I wasn't volunteering to do the wacky skits. I had my other quieter friends, that we hung out with. And something I do credit youth group in some way because like the evolution for me within, getting into high school and then those later years, 10th, 11th, 12th, that was like peak DJ years because I've really went like pretty extroverted in the way that I related to my peers and like what
Mm.
energized me. And really leaned more into leadership and yeah, was up on stage doing music, was leading groups,
Hmm.
was doing the activities and in some ways, I don't know. I don't know how to say it in a way like that's not patting myself on the back. Was like a core person, within the youth group, I suppose.
You basically ran the whole thing.
Yeah,
I hear what you're saying.
I didn't
You were part of leadership. We've described that. You were part of
Yeah.
the leadership team that
yes.
because was one of the kids that they counted on to show up and help and not
Yeah.
just show up.
Right. And it was less for, we didn't have some of this I'm having to like go back and remember, but you've described like a set aside leadership group at Five Oaks where you were doing like early Sunday morning and
Yeah.
there wasn't something as programmatic as that, but I just found myself in that role. I
Hmm.
grew into it in that youth group setting. And I think that's mirrored over on the like school side, my day-to-day life going to high school in the city that I was in and the things that I was involved in through school. I think it started with youth group though.
Okay.
And yeah, so but yeah, just showed up, did all the things, did all the trips, did all the camps, became more comfortable in front of people and just goofier and goofier
Hmm.
because that's what 90s youth group does to you yeah,
If you
If
let
you
it.
if you
if you
let it.
drink the Kool-Aid enough, there you are up on
Literal,
stage. Yeah, like
literal and figurative Kool-Aid.
right,
If you drink
right, right.
enough, real
Yeah,
DJ comes out.
yeah. So that DJ still exists somewhere in there, but that was peak, and
Yeah.
it's kind of like coasted through college, right? And then it's just been on some kind of other trajectory since then.
Little holding pattern in there.
Yeah, adult DJ slowly took over and suppressed youth group DJ.
Well, that's pretty common.
Right. Sound familiar? Yeah.
Well, yes, and the point of this podcast is to have youth group DJ come out at some point. So that's what we're that's what we're going for. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still part of who you are, which is the most important thing.
Yeah,
So,
it's there. Yeah.
yeah. Well, describe for us in general, like what was faith like for you in the 90s and in high school? How would you describe that part of your life during that time?
It's it's interesting to look back because in a lot of ways I've moved away from a lot of like that way of being, I guess, in my faith. And then like there's actually a lot to unpack there. So part of it is my faith was extremely important and I did take aside from all the like zany antics of youth group,
Hmm.
the faith component and growing in that and learning and the discipleship I did take very seriously. And church friends, that was like a comfort space to be. And because it was a very evangelical context, there's a lot of emphasis on living that out
Hmm.
in the rest of my life because most of my time I was, over at public high school just trying to get by. But there was always that pressure to be different, to live out faith in ways that I know you've talked about on the podcast a lot. There was a lot of markers, at
Mm.
the time for what
Hmm.
it meant to, you know, be like a true Christian out in the
Indicators.
world. Yeah,
Yeah.
the things that which are pretty cringy for me now, honestly, to look back on because I think about me in high school being like, well, I'm not gonna swear.
Yep.
Except for like sophomore year when I was like, how much of this do I actually believe? I'm gonna swear a little bit.
So
You
peak
know,
DJ didn't swear, but sophomore DJ was
sophomore DJ, sophomore DJ was like, you gotta have that little
edge.
bit, gotta have
Yeah.
that little edge when
Yeah.
you're in your teenage years and you're figuring stuff out. Yeah, very tame looking back on those
Mm.
years. But right, those were like the important things. And there was so much emphasis on being in the world, but not of the world. And that was such a resounding ethos that I adopted in my high school years. I remember being in like literature class and reading like doing read aloud novels, like 12 Angry Men or something where there was parts.
Mm.
And and being assigned a role and being like, well, I'm not gonna, there's swearing in this, and I'm not, and I using euphemisms. And it was like so awkward, but I would just refuse to actually swear.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I changed the text to be like a euphemism, or just
Hmm.
like things like that that I thought at the time were really important. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'm
Hmm.
supposed to live a certain way, which in retrospect weren't, I would say now, that important.
Yeah, like how effective was that on other people?
Yeah. And yet there was, I mean, there was a sense of the people that I interacted with at school that they knew I was like a church kid, and
Hmm.
that meant something. And I was trying to uphold something about that, I think, and still be a like approachable, nice dude and not be a
Sure.
jerk. So
In contrast to some of the other guests that we've talked to recently, I never you never came across as like the judgy one or like the overly confident one. That's not a diss. It's not a slam or whatever.
yeah,
Like grow a pair, DJ. No,
Be
that's
more
yeah,
not
judgy
that's
next
yeah,
time.
yeah,
yeah.
be more judgy. I
Be more
never
condescending.
yeah, jeez. But like, there's a certain subset of this where it gave some people the confidence, it gave them the freedom to be judgy and a little bit more in your face, and that was just never the vibe I got from you.
I think it's interesting, like reflecting on that judginess that was kind of part of the package. That was, I can think back to myself, and that was very much in my head.
Quietly judgy. Yeah,
Yeah, very. Which, that's one of those regrets of
sure.
what kind of being immersed in that did to the thinking.
Hmm. Well, as a little bit of a, opposite of the regret part of it, like what are some of your best memories about youth group? What are some teachings that are still important to you? What are some things when you think of that time with Heather and that time at Wooddale, like it just pops and it brings joy to your face?
Yeah. It's been fun to listen to the people you've had on, because it creates a lot of reflection of my own experience. And what I realized is there actually isn't good, bad, or neutral a teaching that really pops. And I don't know if that's just time and age, and like those things were meaningful because I certainly ingested them and took them seriously and lived them out,
Hmm.
in on a certain journey from then until now. That makes more sense. We're not
Either
going
way,
backwards in time. Yeah, but I
Whoa.
what I'm Benjamin Button.
it's a special podcast. We can go back in time.
Yeah,
That's
we're,
right.
okay, yeah. Now we're gonna go into some.
Yeah, right.
What stands out was just the activities, some of the craziness, some of the just kind of pure fun trips, and the friendships. And
Hmm.
so, like you said, that was a huge part of, youth group in the 90s. That was a huge part of the draw. There was so much intention around creating community, I think. And my youth group is really large. And so I think
Yeah.
any one leader or volunteer could only do that to a certain extent.
Hmm.
So much of that's organic, You can't force every teenager together into one big group and you're all buddies. There's still a lot, there was still, it's a big enough youth group that there was lots of like subsets of people in different groups, but there was still an overall culture being created. And like in my mind, I think of it as just like the crazy stuff, but I had to actually like dig in a little more and realize, okay, that was junior high youth group. 7, 8, 9 was the prime, like wacky, outrageous stories after stories that I could share
Hmm.
that still stand out clearly in my mind. Like a representative from the seventh, eighth, and ninth grade class getting up on stage and having rigged up some kind of clear plastic bag hula hoop around them full of water with live trout in them, and to see who could hula, basically like have the trout circle you the maximum number of times. And that in and of itself, you're like, who came up with this? But on a whim, or I don't know if this was pre-planned, our youth director was like, the eighth grade guy didn't win, but he was like, hey, I'll give eighth graders like 100 extra points if you bite the head off of your fish. Live trout. And he
oh,
did.
what?
Like, just that stuff clear in my mind.
Well, I hope so.
Man, we didn't have
Like,
trout money at our church. Jeepers.
It's like Ozzy Osbourne style
I
right
know,
there.
right?
Jeez.
Because I think there was a playbook, and then I think my junior high youth pastor was like authoring a good portion of that playbook, just coming up with some like really crazy stuff. But
That's taking
But
Fishers of Men to a whole new level, let me tell you.
there it is. Rim shot. Caleb, edit the rim shot in there. Nice. So you had trout in your pants, and then you were
yeah,
biting the heads off trout.
yeah, I think that's what it was called. Yep.
I
Okay.
think we got
So
the
Trout.
not,
tagline for this episode.
yeah.
What are we doing this Wednesday night? Trout in your
Someone's
pants.
got to go someone's got to go find trout quick.
Okay.
Otherwise, the kids aren't going to get the message.
I'll tell. Okay, I'll give you one more because in you've talked about barf before at your church, which was at first when you mentioned it, you were like, "Oh, there was barf," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, here we go," because everything youth group is
Dude.
about puking, and it was like a nice acronym actually in your
Yeah.
Yeah.
case.
Barf night. Yeah.
Yeah,
Bring a real friend.
so
Yeah.
funny. We had strobe light pillow fight gut bombing night, which was I told you I sent this all to you as like an
You did.
example because it was like progressive dinner, get on a school bus, go to all the fast food restaurants around the church. So make stop at Taco Bell, McDonald's. I don't remember, but it was like a number of fast food restaurants.
Ugh.
Fill the kids up with a bunch of just greasy fast food, and then we went back to our youth room, which was like literally a gym. And we had a gym. There's another gym at this church that's an actual gym. And then there's
Yeah.
the youth room, which is the size of a gym, the height, the width, the everything of a gym. And just put trash cans all over this wide open space, turn the lights off, put the strobe lights on, cue the music, bring your own pillow. And then it's just mayhem, like strobe light pillow fight, which of course is like so disorienting because you see somebody 5 feet away and then the next second you're just getting smashed in the face with a pillow
Dude.
because of the strobe lights. And the goal being, hey, I hope a bunch of people throw up because you just ate all that fast
Junk.
food and we've got all the trash cans.
Oh,
So
dude.
that's okay. So that's, but like, that's what I think back on, that and more serious, good fun, camps and houseboat trips and
Mm.
things like that. And so it's interesting. It's interesting that what kind of like settles out at the end are like funny stories, really like heartwarming kind of stories, not like specific teachings. Like that just kind of got in there. And then the
Mhm.
friendships,
Mhm.
which your whole exercise here in reconnecting with people from that era after, sometimes having not actually talked to people for quite a long time. I mean, if I did that at my youth group, it would be much the same. These were
Mhm.
like the best of friends, and we all mostly went our separate ways, after high
Mhm.
school. And I have not been good at staying in touch with people, but it would be fascinating to, connect with people now and talk about those days because those were, as is true, I think, for teenagers anyway, like those were the most important relationships in my life
Sure.
for sure at the time.
And by far the most vivid.
Yep. Yep.
Now you have two daughters and they're
Mm-hmm.
approaching the same age. Like
Mm-hmm.
you tell them about this and they're like, no, dad, that's not how it is anymore. Like
They would be.
how do you describe this to them?
I'm trying to think of how many of the ridiculous stories that I've told them. Because as that stuff doesn't happen at youth group anymore. Yeah, my daughters are 16 and 15. So they go to a youth group at the church that we've been at for a while. And it is super different because it's a decently sized church, but it doesn't have the like hyper structured big programmatic youth group that I grew up with. It's actually 7th through 12th grade. Like
Oh,
everybody's just in which, when our oldest hit 7th grade, and it was like, okay, it's youth group time, 7 to 12, everyone together. Okay, interesting. See how this goes. And it's been totally fine. They do a good job. They have nice activities, but it is not like that. I mean, they're doing fun stuff at church. It's like, human foosball, right? Where
sure,
you're like holding pool noodles or something maybe, and you have to like
sure.
kick a soccer ball. Something like, yeah, it's fun. It's like fun stuff, but in music and teaching and camp, but it seems reasonable and chill compared to peak 90s youth group, which,
I sometimes think that like the peak 90s youth group stuff that you just described, if it was done in another context, it would have been like sorority or fraternity hazing.
oh
Like,
yeah, yeah,
it's just there was a premium on the craziness that you could get into.
right.
You've listened to enough episodes to know that I ask at the end what the craziest thing was. I'm not going to ask you that, DJ. You've answered that question for me. So
We just
we're not
jump
going
right,
to end
yeah.
there. We're
Yeah, we
not going to end there. Um, we're going into the conversation now, but we've already. You think I'm gonna see how many people can actually top barfing strobe light pillow fighting? Because I always obviously it's funny to talk about, but like I'm always like, what was the purpose, man? Like
I
I don't
went.
know.
I thought it was fun, I think. I don't know.
Did you barf?
No, I didn't,
Oh, good for
thankfully.
you.
Because that's the thing. It's like,
That's
you
gross.
don't want to. Like, why was that the goal? Why did I sign up for that? I did just get destroyed with pillows though by like older dudes, and that
Right.
wasn't as fun. Yeah.
So we've talked to others who have kind of like stayed. I know you went overseas a little bit as well as a young adult. Like, did
Hmm.
you, after high school, did you come back at all? Did you volunteer? Did you do anything?
No.
Because you had two younger brothers going there after you.
Yes, I did. And like I said, my parents continue to go and are still going there, like still
Yep.
very involved there. So there's been a through line that I could certainly have been a part of, but I'm in that camp of people that never really went back in
Mhm.
any meaningful way. Once as absolutely like important as those moments felt, and so, as hard, I can't totally remember, but graduating when people are all kind of going their separate ways, you're like, this era is over. Time for college for those that did that.
Mhm.
I think there's part of me and just how I live anyway. I'll just like close that next chapter. And so I ended up going to school not far away, still in the Twin Cities. And I do remember going back once, like brought some friends from college within that first year, early on, like
Mm.
first semester, because it was like, well, I'm from here. Let's go to my home church that I grew up at. They have a college
Mhm.
ministry. And I remember
Mhm.
doing that once, and it was like, okay. And I don't remember a decisive point or decision or anything about just being like, I think I'm done here.
Hmm.
I just never went back. I didn't volunteer, wasn't really involved in anything, and haven't been all of these years since. Just went,
Interesting.
just, and then that actually ends up tracking with kind of how my life went, and where my faith has gone, where my worldview has gone.
Mhm.
Anyway, it was never decided. There
Mhm.
wasn't something that pushed me out. I didn't even necessarily push myself out, although I would now. I think that's the thing. Like if I could just compile everything over the last 20 years, I would be like, well, yeah, this is not the place for me anymore. But
Mhm.
that's not how it went down.
So there's nothing like holding you there,
No.
even all the people you knew and stuff. And I don't know if that was a function of how big it was, because you're right, and
Hmm.
it
Yeah.
still is a very large church, so
Yes.
maybe it's a little bit harder to go back in that context. Not that I would know, but it sounds like, okay, like I said, chapter over, that door is closed. Let's just do the next thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't, it's actually hard to look back and think through why I ended up being so involved and then so not involved. Because there, like when I was a senior in high school, had great friends who were classes, below, who were still part of the
Mm,
youth group. You know, I think there's just something about college and
hmm.
just needing to launch into something totally new and different and independent. And I just like
Yep.
turned around and went in that direction and yeah, didn't really
Well, and
stay connected. Yeah.
college provides communities that don't replace, but they almost supplement what church communities can do, right? And
Yeah, definitely.
sometimes if people don't leave their hometown and they don't leave the church for that independent context that is college, or maybe moving away for other reasons, they don't experience that other people, other communities can kind of function the same way.
Yeah.
And then, that as that grows in life, you do things like you did, you go overseas, you do different stuff because you can find community there also, and you can find people there you relate to also.
Yeah.
Caleb's sister Bethany did kind of the same thing, and it
Yeah.
was, that widening of the bubble is a really important experience, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I went to a Christian school, within the Twin Cities metro. I didn't go far. And there was a lot of people from my youth group and from my church that like from my class and classes around me that were part of that school too. But it is
Hmm.
interesting how quickly like we all got into our own new and different communities
Yep.
in college. And there's something about that that feels a little bit unfortunate, but at the same time, it's very natural. I mean,
Yeah,
I
it's very
think
appropriate.
it's just yeah, you just you start, you make some new friends, you just start in like in your own little corner of a new community, and
Hmm.
that's how life goes.
Yep. They make the most of it.
Yep.
Well, you kind of allude to it a little bit, but what is your, the crux of this podcast, this whole thing? How does your faith look like now compared to that of the 90s? What stayed the same? What perhaps is different or has changed?
It's hard to summarize it nicely, other than to say that very little of it is probably actually the same,
Hmm.
I would say, as my faith then. And so, maybe unlike or I don't know, maybe similar too. You're talking to a lot of folks from that era, and I know a lot of the people that have been on are, pretty well still involved. Their faith has evolved in certain ways, but might still be involved at the church or a different church. Or I find myself at this point in life at a very interesting spot that I don't really know how to define anymore because
Hmm.
so many of the core pieces of my Christian faith from that point in life, thinking back to the 90s and youth group and that whole era, are a lot of the things that I, over the course of the rest of my life, not in any like thought out or purposeful way, just naturally by living life, having lots of experiences, traveling the world, living abroad, learning a lot, and naturally just being somebody that challenges and asks questions and wants to figure things out. Like those things just unraveled
Hmm.
for me, and where I like maybe arrived at a different way of considering some element, still within like Christian thinking or theology that I, might have thought of it one way before, and maybe I deviated a lot from that. And then maybe just eventually let go of it as something that I don't really think is important, and
Hmm.
so it's almost like what we were just talking about in just that one moment of going from being in high school youth group and then leaving it and moving on. And like, what was there like one decision there that caused me to say, yeah, I'm not going to really go back or stay involved there? No, it's like just slowly over time challenging
Hmm.
things that I assumed to be true.
So not one like large event or anything that really kind of pushed you in one direction or not? Because you
No.
mean you allude to it already, like you guys are still going to church, your daughters are still in youth group and all that type of stuff. So it's still important to you. It's just different probably than what even you expected it to be.
Oh, totally. Yes. You wouldn't have known. Yeah. I don't know how to define it now. Wouldn't have known how to look at it and define it then.
Hmm.
And there's been lots of serious like lots of things have happened in life for sure. There isn't one thing, but I could look back and point at lots of different things. Some moments, some traumatic, some just very poignant
Hmm.
experiences that were really meaningful. And ultimately, yeah, like finding, because my faith in high school at that time, like as a young adult, it's like a faith of certainty. It's about rightness of belief, and that gets
Hmm.
very narrow, and it's because it's defined against a lot of other, it's defined as for things, but it's very often defined as different than or against things. And then especially within the Christian faith, just all the little slices and dices of dogma, and that was a feature of my faith for sure in high school. Was you've talked about it on this podcast, and it's something I look back on that's just like, oh, you know, I set myself apart from, people who would also profess a Christian faith. They just were Lutheran or, any
Hmm.
number of other like denominational expressions of it, not to mention, people who wouldn't even consider themselves within the faith. And
Hmm.
that, I mean, I think like digging into that over a lifetime of what are these things that I held as the things that I had to believe? And you just kind of start pulling the cards out of the house of cards. And
Hmm.
for a lot of people, I think that's very uncomfortable and to be avoided. And they don't want the house of cards to fall down. So the one question that's kind of thorny, let's keep the card maybe in the house of
Hmm.
cards, because if I pull that one out, well, then what about that, that, and that? And
Right.
suddenly we've got a mess.
Right.
I've just been totally comfortable with pulling out those cards. And I'm went through many years of wow, I'm really outside of the bounds of the faith that I grew up in.
Hmm.
Do I just keep going? And now that question isn't even important to me anymore. Just
Mm.
that's pretty vague, but
No,
yeah.
no, I don't. I think a few things. I think like our next set of podcasts are going to be like the certainty episodes because they some of these people will okay by this time they'll have listened to them or at least the episodes will be out. But a lot of people have kind of who have changed, not left the faith, let's say, but their faith has changed in dramatic ways that their high school self would not have expected,
Uh-huh.
kind of pin that certainty issue as something that they were, and I myself too, coming out of college and even going into seminary, you know, and coming out of high school, going into college, out of college, into seminary, it was like certainty was a big deal, and that was very important.
It was, yeah.
And to hear that it was part of your experience at a different youth group, other people we've talked to are different youth groups and had the same thing. That's I think a definition of the evangelical model is we have to prove these things.
Yeah.
They have to be empirically proven on a theological level to kids at the time. Otherwise, they're giving up a lot of
Yeah.
fun to do this. We better make sure it's true, where we kind of miss some of the positive reasons of doing it. Instead, we just had to be convinced.
Yeah, definitely. Because if your model is certainty, then that's going to get challenged in an infinite number of ways out just in life.
Hmm.
And yeah, I know a lot of the mission was to like build up the defenses against that. And I thought I had some, I thought I had it pretty well worked out. And then I know as you've talked about, Scott, like it wasn't, I went to the big university, and learned a bunch of science and, anything like I went to a
And
Christian
poof, yeah.
college and thankfully like that, I mean, that was a liberal arts education that like taught me to think for real.
Hmm.
It's the start of it. And I studied sociology and anthropology, and so I was naturally just immersed in like looking at other people and societies and how they do things, and like giving up a sense of othering people and adopting a, giving up ethnocentrism in favor of like an openness towards people, which really lended itself well to continuing to learn and grow and meet people and consider other opinions, and having
Hmm.
that have to challenge what I just kind of held as
Hmm.
true. And when I didn't have a good answer for that within like my faith framework, those are things that I eventually, like reluctantly at first, but eventually had to let go of and feel all the better for it in terms of how I can be a human living in this world, and interacting with other humans these days. But it was my Christian college that started me on the path of challenging everything about my faith in a good way. I think like I
Right.
think it was all very positive because the things that I was learning and studying and wrestling with when it came to justice, and my senior thesis was on, okay, my senior thesis, I actually used critical race theory. Like for real, the real critical race theory, the actual theory applied towards racist incidents that were happening very
Hmm.
unfortunately on my campus. And
Mm.
to really do like qualitative, and okay, this is my BA, senior thesis. It was not any big research by any stretch of the imagination, but was doing qualitative
Still.
research with my friends on campus who were like BIPOC students and not in the majority with some of those, big identifiers that define Christian school and
Hmm.
the 2000s in the Twin Cities. And that, like those were, that set a trajectory for me.
So again, to be clear, your college was the same. I went to seminary where you went to college. They
Yes.
had a college and a seminary.
Yes.
And I do think that school gives prioritize giving Christians a safe space to go through those things.
Yeah.
And sometimes people go there and they don't change and they still have the same viewpoints, even just more robust. That's perfectly fine. But other people go there, and certainly there are other Christian schools like that teach you to be analytical, to be curious, but it's a safe environment to go through that and encouraged a little bit because at the end of the day, the more experiences, the more viewpoints they have in the student body and the classes and things like that, it's gonna help people. And
Hmm.
ultimately, if we're talking in a Christian context, does that bring people closer to God? I think so.
Uh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because if anything, it pushes you to live outside yourself.
Right. I think that's what's interesting is looking back. It wasn't like a process of just throwing things out. Like
Right.
I don't even believe this, like a dismantling of faith. It was actually like a refining, because it's not like I,
Hmm.
kind of started in on that course for life back in those college years and then just completely, because I know that, I mean, that happens to plenty of people.
Hmm.
They they encounter enough and they just give it all up. But
Hmm.
I mean, this is a lifelong process for me. I mean, I was still extremely involved in college, did all the things, played in Vespers, like did all of that, left school to work for like a mission organization, went overseas as a missionary, for a
Hmm.
year and a half, with my wife, and then have worked in Christian nonprofits for the better part of the last 20 years. And only now have I kind of left that world, but it's not like I think I have resentment towards the voices within Christendom these days that are so critical of, like people who are deconstructing, their faith. Like it got so like buzzy and pejorative, and you hear this pushback on that, like, oh, these people were never really in it to begin with, and it's like, nope,
Right.
I've got the receipts, like,
I've had trouts
uh,
in my pants.
yeah, like let me lay
Have
out my
you?
life for you. Like I have done everything that I was told I should do in service to, like this faith, in service to Jesus and others. Like I based my learning around it. I based my career on it. I went overseas. I served. I've done all of the things. So, and like, I've never been actively trying to get out. I've just been actively living
Hmm.
for 43 years. And I'm at a point now where I'm like, yeah, actually, there's a lot of positive things looking back on youth groups specifically, which I know is like that's where the focus starts with this conversation. There's so much good there. I just happen to have walked away from a lot of it. And I know this is where Caleb's disclaimer comes in, like, everyone shares different views. And yeah, my views are going to be different. I've I've let go of most of the dogmas, but I still, yeah, like, I'm still involved. Like, I maintain a connection still to Christianity and church and, as a family. And I feel like I've walked out to the edge and I just kind of stopped there.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like, I
Hmm.
can't give this up completely.
Yep.
Like the whole of reality in the universe can't be explained away without God, I think.
Hmm.
And yet everything else is a mystery to me. So, like, and I'm okay with
And
that.
that's
So,
okay. That's
yeah,
a
yeah,
Christian mysticism is can be a
yeah,
beautiful thing if you give it a, give it some, give it a chance a little bit, and
yeah.
there's a lot of wonder in scripture too, and there's not a lot of answers. And, Caleb, we talked recently to a couple of guests about their experience with, Lutherans in town and all that stuff, and that's been a theme on many
Hmm.
episodes. And, we've mentioned from time to time, like, basically at some point every denomination thinks that they're the right ones, and they're all trying to convert the others, that sort of stuff. Obviously Christian history is littered with a lot of terrible examples of that, but
Like mass murder. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, the things we tend to gloss over in youth group. But it's I was thinking about that comment though, like, yeah, well, we all thought we were doing the right thing. Yeah, that's true. But I think 90s evangelicalism had something about it where we really were ravenous to convert, 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 get the message out. I There was never a time in my youth when the Lutherans or Catholics in my life were like, "Hey, you have to come to church, to my
Right.
church," right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you're an evangelical, you need to come be a Catholic. That wasn't part of what they were doing.
Right.
And so there was so much conviction behind the whole thing. And to get to a point, DJ, where I hear your story being somewhat of like, there wasn't a big pillar that dropped or a big event per se, but I've kind of trusted the process to happen. I still trust God in it, even
Hmm.
though it looks very different. That's a lot different than being like, I'm standing in this one position. I'm not going to get anywhere close to the edge, and that's not somewhere I want to go. And I'm going to get everyone to join me as much as I possibly can. I think those are two very different things, and I hear that in your story.
Yes.
Can I ask you, you've talked about a comfortability moving and kind of shifting and letting some of those go, but it also sounds like it's been within a Christian context in church, in family, and in work. Have you been met with resistance? You talked about like kind of the large Christendom,
Yeah.
those deconstruction folks are just people who want to sin more. You've talked about some of that, but like, have you experienced it? Like, have you experienced resistance within that? And has that been something that you've had to kind of walk through in this process?
It's a good question because I think it's mostly just been in my most closest relationships, like probably just family relationships. And
Hmm.
as you could probably imagine or expect, it's not playing out like theological lines necessarily. I do remember. Sorry, this is where I'm just gonna like start dropping in some like specific stuff that people will probably disagree with. But like I remember mostly offhandedly being like, well, I don't believe in hell anymore,
Hmm.
Hmm.
with my brothers, like like on a family trip or something, and then being like, what, and then having to like get into a nice like big long conversation about that that nobody
Hmm.
was expecting or necessarily wanted,
They were
but
asked for.
yeah, right. But
We were just here to
those
catch trout to put in our
I
pans.
I
What are we
know,
doing
right?
here? I'm gonna go back to that joke every time now.
Yeah, that's right.
We've got this sweet side gig supplying the youth group with
That's
trout.
right. They're still doing it.
It's really lucrative. Just shut up and fish. No, it's not so much that unfortunately in the last many years now, actually, it's played out more on like, political lines, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
it's the everything that's in the air in society and the way that those things have gotten so enmeshed within Christianity, evangelical Christianity, and politics, and that I think that's where the chasm started to grow, or the friction started, was having disagreements around there. And it's all so caught up in itself that it was like impossible to not be like, well, like I've changed dramatically in kind of what I think about this, and that's actually pretty deeply related to my faith and some other ways in which I foundationally kind of think about the world, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's like in these really close relationships I haven't really, I know, Caleb, you've publicly on the here, shared at least one story. Like, I've never had like a really big kind of uncomfortable confrontation, or something in more of a community or at work. And that's one of the things that actually was challenging to my young faith as an adult, is working in, I'm doing air quotes, like, Christian nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
However, the adjective Christian can be applied, which is so many ways, but those are very ecumenical cultures of people coming together for like a mission driven organization,
Mm.
who, for the most part, identify spiritually as Christian, and that being somehow foundational to what that organization is doing. But it's like suddenly working in this like work, also very like personal religious context, with people who actually believe a pretty good diversity of things within
Mm-hmm.
the Christian sphere, and simultaneously going, working things out for myself in that context, I guess, but more personally. I know it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like a complicated answer, but
Oh, I just wonder, you kind of
yeah,
hear like to be so confident in it. Like I've had to be more to get more confident to say it in front of people. And maybe it's because I was at Bethlehem Baptist
yeah,
when I started to unravel some of these things, and it was just really hard to say those things without being put down. So it's just interesting to hear you kind of, and just you've been even more ensconced in a lot of ways, like working in a Christian, or I've just been working out in corporate America for the last 15 years. That's where I've been. I was in a school before that. And so I
mhm.
didn't have those interactions so consistently. So that's just really interesting to hear kind of where some of that maybe friction or resistance has come in your life, and just kind of how it's played out.
Yeah. There's so many areas of my life now in which I choose almost always to not really say a whole lot about
Mm-hmm.
what I actually think, just
That
because.
that's become my default. You're
Yeah,
dead on.
Interesting.
I've
yes.
really struggled with some of the sermons recently, and me and my one buddy at church, who I'm a lot more on same pace with, we literally had a text exchange after the last sermon. I was like, "Are we gonna
Like
have to
during the
debrief?
sermon. Yeah.
Are we gonna have to debrief every sermon up
Uh-huh.
until November?" Like it was kind of like this realization of it, and just both of us have decided, yeah,
Not worth your energy.
yeah, it's not worth it.
Yeah, that's I think, for the sake of community and
Yeah.
Mm.
relationships, and a lot of good that comes out of different arenas of life that I'm still a part of, it's not worth it. I've spent a lot of years, burned a lot of energy and probably some social capital actually challenging things, and it's not worth it
Hmm.
anymore, because I think
Mm.
there's a part of me, I think, that's like terrified of actually being like found out,
Hmm.
because it's important to still maintain relationships with people, because I like them, like, and like it's weird. I don't want to be judged. That's the thing, is
Mm.
like it's like this. I've like gone so far to the other side that I'm like, oh, I I would be judged harshly by like 18-year-old me,
Hmm.
probably, and I don't want that. So I'm gonna keep my mouth shut
What a
until I
segue
go
into
on a
that into
podcast.
I know.
what a segue into
Into
Scott's
this
next question.
questions. Well, I mean, I don't want to get too long in the tooth on this conversation, but it's an excellent conversation, so I don't want to derail it either. But question we try and ask everybody, because it's one I think about all the time, is like, what would your high school self now tell your 43-year-old self, and vice
Mhm.
versa? Like, I think there are messages that each can tell each other. Like, what do you think you'd say to each other?
Stay at peak DJ. Stay at peak
Yeah.
DJ.
Peak DJ is the best DJ.
Yeah. Find a way to freeze time. Just keep doing this. You're in quite the bubble, but you're happy. It's fine.
That's right.
It's yeah, it's hard. It's hard to not be really specific because I would never go back to my 18-year-old self and be like, "Hey, dude, okay, here's the list. It's really long of all the things that I'm gonna like
Hmm.
just smash about what you think right now."
Uh-huh.
But the general way I think all of us think about that seems to be like you want to just tell your younger self, like, just relax. Like
Mm.
things aren't certain the way that you think they are. And of course, maybe you can anticipate this at 18, like, yeah, you're going to grow up and life's going to get harder and it's more complicated and you take on a lot more responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't really appreciate that. And it's like, you have like life is so much more complex than you could ever imagine, and people are so much more complex. And stop trying to like just figure it all out. Just relax, man. Like that's,
Hmm.
but I think 18-year-old me would look at me now and would look at a lot of the markers that still exist, would look at everything that's happened from 18 to 43 and be like, okay, yeah, yeah, okay, you did that. Okay, yeah, oh, you worked there. Okay, yeah, that seems right. That seems good. But then you like peel back the curtain on like here's my thinking these days, and the yeah 18-year-old me would be like, what, how dare you? Like,
Some of the life choices, maybe around work and stuff, be like, yeah, I get it. And then the theology be like, dude, no,
yeah,
no way. There's no
you
way I'd ever get there.
right, yeah, I think that's how I would think of myself if I knew,
Hmm.
which is just a very interesting exercise to consider.
Well, it's either very healthy or very unhealthy, depending on the day. But I
Or it
do think
screws you up
it's
so much you start a podcast about it.
that's exactly right. Here we are. I wanted to ask kind of one final question, and we can continue to share thoughts on this topic. But as you were talking about your youth group experience and the people that you were involved with, again, we've had very similar conversations as of late. I'm always in awe of the adults who spend so much time and continue to spend so much time volunteering. It's an amazing thing.
Hmm.
Have they the chance to listen to you now, and so for someone like me as well, I always I'm continuing to go back to this thought that, like, sure, our youth pastors probably are not like great. They don't believe in hell anymore, or they have a very different political view. Like,
Hmm.
that's not what they wanted, right? Fine, it's not their
Yeah,
life,
sure.
but I do have to commend their efforts in helping us find a foundation that remains. And that's not the case for everybody. For some people, the deconstruction conversation is it doesn't result in anything. It's just I'm out of here.
Yeah,
And they get to that edge and they jump off and they never come back.
yeah.
But for a lot of people, they still want to maintain a belief in God, a relationship with Jesus, however, whatever that looks like, just different. And I don't think we could do that without what we experienced in the 90s. So that all being said, how do you think 90s youth group contributes to the person you are today?
That is right on, and it's something I've thought a lot about because I I wouldn't have necessarily wanted to live it out differently. It feels very privileged, I guess, is the word I think of, to have been able to have the experiences I've had with all the ups and downs of life, the life that I've been able to live, and to have had the ability to kind of use the buzzy word deconstruct my faith over a series of lots of years and experiences and influences and those types of things. And to arrive here now, I look back and I don't regret how, like, I don't go back to youth group and think, oh, why did I believe all that stuff? Or why did I do that? You know, et cetera, et cetera. It is a weird, it's a weird mental exercise in being like, actually, this path works and it makes sense to me. And I don't resent earlier versions of myself that acted in ways or believed things that I would now not accept. That's okay. Like that's the path of life. And so I can look back and honestly be grateful for all those adults, the actual like paid staff of the church and the many, many volunteers, or like my parents just for like driving me to
Right.
youth group all the time, or saying, yeah, you can do that houseboat trip. Oh, we're gonna send a bunch of like teenagers and one pretty young youth leader for like a week out on a houseboat up on Rainy Lake. That's is actually super fun. Only a few misadventures, you know. Only crashed into a cliff once. Only one broken leg. I
The
mean,
over under on crashing into cliffs was like 1.5. So we're
yeah,
pretty good.
we're above average. But you know what I mean? Like I can look back on that and say, I can't be me now without having had experiences that at the time were super meaningful that I now have very complicated feelings about. But I wouldn't be able to pull out the things that were really instrumental in shaping me without having had it in the first place. It is a tricky, like it's a tricky answer to that question because the short answer is, props to the volunteers and for people that poured into me because it was overwhelmingly positive. And, you know, of course, and that's the thing. It's like, I feel like a lot of these conversations are looking back on 90s youth group and it's like, oh, the ridiculous stuff and this and that. But at least with this isn't like a church two conversation or some of the absolutely horrific things that go down in churches. Like that's not what we're talking about here. I'm talking, you know, I've got experiences that are overwhelmingly positive. I have my own kind of faith journey that I've been wrestling with. It's all very personal, but it's thankfully not a traumatic relationship to church and faith and evangelical Christianity that I am like marked with or wrestling with these days. So despite what can easily be a lot of cynicism for me, it's positive things that stand out from that era. Yeah.
Excellent. DJ, we really appreciate all the honesty and the thoughtfulness behind your answers here tonight, and taking the time to discuss with us. It's been really great to catch up with you again. We see you around, but frankly, we don't get a lot of opportunity to talk this way. And so
it's true.
It's refreshing. And maybe we should do it more in a non-podcast context.
Off the record.
Off the record. That you know of. I'm going to record it for a secret episode. But no, honestly,
Patreon exclusive.
Patreon.
We got him.
This is how we make money.
Oh, I'm subscribing now.
But no, honestly, thank you for joining us, and thank you for being so thoughtful in your answers and honest with us. It was really great catching up.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to talk to you too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. Once again, we want to thank DJ. We loved talking with him and kind of hearing about his youth group experience and how that experience sticks with him even as his faith grew and changed in adulthood. Let us know what you thought about this episode or any of our other shows. You can find us on Twitter at the handle @SurvivedYG. You can also email the show at isurvivedyouthgroup@gmail.com. If you're interested in being on the show, let us know. You can find us at either of those two places. You didn't necessarily have to attend our youth group like DJ, but if you have your own youth group experience from the 90s or the 2000s that you think would be interesting to share, we'd love to connect. We'd love to hear your story and kind of really hear about how that youth group experience has impacted your life and sticks with you, even as your views change and grow, just like DJ's. So again, we'd love to have you on the show. Please reach out. We'd love to connect. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or a review. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release date of thousands of albums. Throughout the week, I post about them on social media. We've had a couple different formats on the show, but it's a chance to sit down and talk about one of these albums that I've documented on my calendar, really celebrate it. And once again, that is called the Album Anniversary Podcast. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon.
All right, I just had a question in mind. Caleb, we're gonna have to edit this out. Sorry.
I refuse.
Yeah.
I've started putting that at the end of almost every episode.
Where
you saying I need to edit this out and me saying no.
Little bumper at the end.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Keep this.
I have one more question about then, and then we'll kind of transition into now.
Yeah.
Caleb, for the school stuff. What?
I was saying cut.
Okay. Yep.
I mean, it was like, I just realized now, it's like, we've managed in all of this talk of like 90s youth group. I'm sorry, listener, if this even makes it in. It's like such a side, like, conversation to the conversation. But my relationship to Christian music is thanks to Scott. 100%.
Whoa.
The good stuff. And then, which of course, Caleb has a lot to do with that. It's just at the time we weren't all like as connected. But
sure.
Yeah. I mean, we could go deep into that, which is a whole other conversation.
Oof. That's tempting.
I mean, I was in a ska band eventually, for God's sake. Like, peak. Yes. So, anyway.
Well,
moving on. All right, here's the bump. Here's where you put in the bumper music. Well, you do have music, but you
should sample Bus Empty here as a little different.
Do you have any recordings of Bus Empty? That was asked.
I was gonna say, you were asked by like another person in the world.
Yeah, during that 2.5 hours of Christian ska.
Yeah.
Somebody.
Well, you were the only one that knew about Bus Empty.
No, Todd knew. Todd
is not even from the Twin Cities, right?
But his website, Ska for Christ, he showed me the list. And now I'll be real clear. He had basically anybody who wanted to be involved in that site could send in any ska band that was Christian that they had ever run into. Yeah. So basically it was this collection of all these local ska bands from around the country that, only the people in, Boise, Idaho knew of.
Right.
Trouts in the Pants. That was the only people that knew of that group. And so he got those all submitted. So somebody sent him Bus Empty as like, hey, this is a band, and it was on his list.
Who knows about Bus Empty?
That's amazing.
And it wasn't me. Except, okay, I'm sorry. We have it's like 11 already, and we're already derailed. But okay. I remember listening to that, and somebody made a comment about like getting a Kickstarter going, and I thought it was you.
No, but it was Phil.
I know. Okay, but I was like, that didn't sound like Caleb. Who knows my name? Because it was like specifically.
Did he say DJ?
Yeah,
I may have said your name.
Okay, I was like, that had to have been Caleb because nobody else would know anything about this.
So there you go.
Good. I gotta get like Balaam's talking mule on that list.
Oh man.
Okay.
That was a phase.
Yeah. I don't know how he's. Yeah.
Well,
I'm sorry. I have a CD of some like pretty bad Bus Empty recordings, and that might be I don't think anything else exists in the world that I know.
I think that's a lot of those bands.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
It was like 1998.
Reese Roper has straight up said the reason for a long time he hated ska was because of all the local ska bands that would open up for them when they would tour. He's like, by the end of their first incarnation, he was just like, I hated ska. Yeah, you'd go to Boise, Idaho, Trouts in the Pants would get up and they'd play, and you'd just be like,
"This sucks.
Guys are the worst band I've ever seen in my life. I want to blow the city up." And so he was like, "I hate." He's like, for years I hated ska, and it took me like Andy, their drummer, had to like reintroduce me to like, no, here, have this, and like spoon feeding someone back to health.
Right.
Here's Bus Empty. No, Bus Empty did open up for, I want to say it was the Insiders
I remember
Dude,
that.
at the
yes.
New Union, and
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
we were there.
didn't play. I didn't play. I wasn't there. Isn't that ridiculous?
That is ridiculous.
I don't know what I had something. Anyway, sorry. Like again, music. As
And I
like
was
a new,
right. You guys had a tuba, right?
we did.
Yeah.
I was like, dang, Caleb is good. Yeah, we had a sousaphone and just unseemly amount of people. But that was what you did.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The more people you could jam into your ska band, the like
better.
zanier it was. So
Yeah.
Except for the best new ska band in the world is 4 people.
Yeah.
Catbite.
Oh.
Catbite. The best new ska band in the world.
Okay.
They
write it down.
Whale.
Nice.
Sorry, I get late and I just really start the cursing.
Yay. More
Yes.
bleeps. More bleeps.
Oh, this is all getting cut out anyway.
I know. That's what I was like.
Save it for later. Just
How
save
much?
it for later.
How much should I just like really unleash here and make you have to do way more editing?
I've gotten pretty good with the curses.
Yeah, feel free. Feel free.
It's really pushed me because they kept on dropping everyone's last name.
Last names.
I was
Yeah.
like, why? And I couldn't.
One's coming up was like there's like a segment where she says the last names like 6 or 7 in about a minute, and you're like, whoa, settle down.
It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So anyway, all right, Scott, you want to start the show?